How could Gibson discontinue the studio? Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. It's because they had to make way for the new modern studio. Here it is in bald guy burst. At least that's what I call it. This is a Gibson exclusive one. You can't actually buy this one at dealers, so I thought we should document this one for that reason. Because typically you will only find these in stores in these base model colors. A wine red satin, a smokehouse satin, and a worn white, which is still a satin finish despite not being in its title. But if you're curious why I call this one Bald Guy Burst, it's because it looks exactly like a guy who's got the really nice beard going around his face, but then he's bald up top. It's not an insult, it's a stylistic choice. So no, the studio is not gone, it just underwent a metamorphosis as it continues on. Because the studio was first introduced in the year 1983, and it's been in production ever since in one way or the other. So at first you had the Studio Standard, and the Studio Custom. And those were pretty cool because the first couple of years were made with alder bodies before they transitioned back into mahogany. But then by the late 80s, you could start to find ebony fretboard ones with dot inlays. Sometimes they were also rosewood. But by the 90s, that is the golden era of Les Paul Studios. And it's something that Gibson has been competing with themselves ever since with, because ebony fretboards were the stock option for a good couple of years, and they finally gave them the trapezoid inlays. But then about 1995, they go back to rosewood, and then we have just a whole bunch of different iterations. You also have the introduction of the Tribute model. The studio was essentially created as a bare bones Les Paul. You take away the binding, you still get the same electronics, the bodies are ever so slightly thinner, and it makes them a little bit more affordable. So what is new with our latest generation? It's the return of ebony fretboards. When Gibson teased this, I got really excited because they're finally trying to outdo themselves for the 90s studios. Make them unique, because unfortunately they had to raise the price on these guys. Old studios before they were discontinued were $16.99 brand new, and it always seemed kind of hard to justify a brand new studio, and these ones are $2,000, which is a lot. But they've changed a lot of things about these. So being part of the modern series, it always kind of seemed weird that these didn't really look all that modern, but we now have the little swoop on the back of the body to help play in the upper fret registers, similar to what you would find on the full-on Les Paul Modern. The next thing you might be noticing is we do not have a gloss finish anymore. This is a satin, and that kind of scared me. But at least this particular finish, it's actually quite nice. It's one of those really high quality nitro satins. It still feels slightly glossy, and this whole open pore look kind of had me scared on some of those worn white ones, but this is nice and smooth. But get this, we actually have a Mother of Pearl logo on the headstock. Usually studios do not get fancy attributes like that. And if you notice, our chrome hardware is black chrome this time, so that's a little bit new. But we still have the fancy electronics in here for coil splitting, direct to bridge, and in and out of phase. So if you're a fan of that, you're going to be happy here. This is certainly one of my favorite studios that they've came out with in a while. The last time that they really deviated on what a studio was supposed to be was back in 2018, where they randomly decided to put binding on the fretboard, which is kind of cool now that it's discontinued. Whoa, hold the phone! The modern studio has binding too? It's just black. You can't see it. I was checking this thing for fret sprout, and yeah, sure enough, it's got black binding. So now it's just we don't have binding along the body. These things are pretty heavily spec'd. Now our price makes a bit more sense, I think. But I was surprised to read that they're putting a compound fretboard radius on this. So essentially this is a rebirth of the studio to justify the new price that they had to do in order to make the model viable. Also, they had to increase the price to make the modern light look more attractive. I mean, $14.99 seemed expensive for those, but now when the next step up is $500 more rather than $200, people are usually more responsive to price changes when they just completely discontinue something and then come out with a similar but different model name. At the end of the day, these are very different from other studios, which I imagine could help their sales. Because I was telling you earlier how new studios, they just never really made sense to me. These ones have unique enough features that somebody might want to give it a try. They're still coming in these gig bags. Would have been nice to have a hard shell case, sure, but it is what it is. But to learn more, let's go ahead and throw this one on the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs. Inside our modern studio. So first off, this being a satin finish and it feeling like one of the nicer, higher quality ones, I wanted to do a durability test. Is this the version that'll never buff up on you? So I did a little polishing under our pick guard. So this is what will happen as you naturally play it. You'll buff it into a semi-gloss, And you can see the blue just gets a much darker look to it. So keep that in mind if you're buying one of these, because that's going to happen on the neck very fast, because that's a high traction area where you're playing it and where your arm rubs right here. If you don't want that to happen, you can use like a wrist guard or something. But on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you don't like the feel of a satin finish, you can just take some polishing and elbow grease and go to town and make it a semi-glossed finish. Another cool modification option on these Studios is you can actually see the maple top joining onto the mahogany body right here. If you take a razor blade, you can strip away the finish to expose it to look like natural binding. And I did think about doing that, just to show you guys the process and make it a little more fun, but I don't think that would look good with this particular finish, since we're really going for that kind of blacked out vibe. But let's dive into our pickups now. It's the 490R in the neck and the 498T in the bridge. It's been that way ever since the 90s. I think it's a nice pickup set. And the routes look very clean. It's a short neck tenon, and you can see more of the maple top and mahogany body. Kind of a cool sectioning in the bridge pickup cavity as well. But now our pickup readings, 13.85 in the bridge, 7.72 in the neck, in the middle for fun, 4.95. Don't forget, you can coil split everything to get about half that. However, it's running on a PCB system, so we're not going to be able to get those readings within the circuit. This one is direct to bridge, meaning, regardless of what your other settings are, you're on your neck pickup and the tone's down, and you have your regular bridge pickup slightly off as well. If you do this, it bypasses everything, and it's just the bridge pickup wide open, wired into your output jack. So that does slightly change your reading. In my experience, it gives you just a little bit hotter of a tone. Then this one is middle position only, gives you that quacky Peter Green out of phase type tone. And all those are on nice black speed knobs. So the options are here if you want them. If you don't, play like a normal guitar. It's utilizing a Nashville style bridge system, also done up in black chrome, which we have not seen very often lately. And then I was surprised to see a full weight tailpiece. I would have thought that would have been lightweight aluminum, but advanced plating branded as well. And check this out, no poker chip stock. I'm curious, is there one in the case? Yes, as well as a spare blank truss rod cover if you're interested in that, your truss rod tool, Gibson polishing cloth, a version of a Gibson strap, your owner's manual, Gibson app information, warranty card, and all that housed in this black baggie. Curious on your thoughts. Poker chip on or off? I kind of like it on, but the gold lettering sure does stand out like a sore thumb. Too bad we couldn't have had black chrome lettering. Or you know what? Let's be a rebel and just install it upside down. Sadly, it's a little bit more reflective on the other side, so it doesn't quite work. But our pick guard is also nice and black with matching black chrome bracket. I don't think I've actually ran into one of those before. And they do have that little felt pad. So here's the cool thing about a Studio. They generally get like the C grade tops, you're not gonna get any crazy figuring on most of them. However, you always have the chance to have a ridiculously flame top if you get a finish that you can see through. This one, it's got some nice wood grain, but I'm not gonna lie to you, you do not see this outside of the camera. Because right now I've got a bunch of light on this. In person, it's basically kind of a dark blue violet color. I would honestly say it has a little bit more purple up here, and then it fades more into a blue, but it looks a little bit more even in the camera. It's important to note that these now have the modern weight relief, so that's the V-shaped one with a few other chamberings. So that makes them a little bit lighter as well as being a slightly thinner body. This one at its thickest is a little over 1.8, whereas a standard is typically about 2 inches thick along the edges. So now that we know about the maple top and mahogany body, we've got a mahogany neck, so they left things traditional there, but then the ebony fretboard. That is bound, believe it or not. Now that I know that makes me like this model even more because they really did try to jam-pack almost all the standards features in here and truly reinvent the Studio. Gibson, you need to point this out. I don't think people understand these are bound. Even if you know it's bound, it's hard to tell because they don't do the fret nibs on the modern series guitars. Hear me out. The black binding's not really doing much for this. Delete that. Give us a hard shell case. I'm not sure how much the labor costs Gibson to do that, but if it could make sense, I think that would be a more attractive option. Or at least it would be to me. Because I love unbound ebony fretboards. There's a certain niceness to it. And back to the whole finding the binding on this, it was because I was looking at the edge. I've heard a lot of complaints about fret sprout. People are saying they're trying these out at Guitar Center and they don't like them. And I just always thought, well, that's Guitar Center for you. They don't have the perfect humidity and whatnot. But no, you can see where it's occurring on this brand new one. And I bought this out of the Gibson garage, so you know it was in better situations than most and really hadn't been shipped too much before it got to me. You can just see a little protrusion right there. And the binding is like that main feature that causes tooling marks that people rip on Gibson about. So I feel like unbound ebony would probably be better for them. However, the nice thing about it being bound is you don't actually feel the fret poking out the edge. However, I would like to see a little bit more rounding of the edges to the ends of the frets. It's not like it's gonna cut you, but a little bit more care to those at the factory would be nice. Still a standard 24 3/4 inch scale. Then looks like it starts around 10 inches. It feels closest to 14 to me by the end. But anyways, 1.7 inches at the nut, 2.09 by the 12th, 0.8 first fret neck depth, increasing to 0.9 by the 12th. There's that neck profile at the first fret and the 12th fret, just a standard C shape. Now our headstock, once again, Gibson Mother of Pearl logo. It's all satin finished. You could also buff that up into a gloss if you really wanted to. Here you can see that beautiful mahogany wood grain and our truss rod. In stock from the factory, we've got the studio branding on the truss rod cover, but the blank one is included in the case. I love that Gibson does that. However, it kind of seems wasteful. I wouldn't mind them discontinuing that. And then, you know, if you really want to buy a blank one, they can sell it to you for like, what, 15 bucks? Kind of like when Apple used to include chargers with everything. But at least most people aren't throwing away their blank truss rod covers. They just leave them in the case forever. Not quite the same e-waste wise. Moving on to the backside, no surprises here. It's the PCB Quick Connect system, so if you don't like the 490R, 498T series pickups, buy yourself some white connector Quick Connect pickups from Gibson, and you'll be able to swap those in and out without a tech. And still have all the fanciness. Those routes are nice and clean. I like to see it. Output jack plate is black plastic. We've got straight up black strap button down here, as well as in our other location. A quick peek in our toggle switch cavity. Everything's looking good as well. And then our little swoop. It just takes a little bit out of the body, helps you get to the higher frets a little bit easier. Not as good as a full-on Access custom. You gotta go custom shop to get that nowadays, but better than nothing. But it is important to note, the top is a lot smoother in feel. Like, this isn't bad, right? But you can still feel that wood grain because the pores in the maple is way different than on mahogany. You get a very similar phenomenon going on the neck. However, I would make the argument that you don't feel it quite as much as the body because they've rounded this over. And looking it over, I don't see any obvious seam lines. So, I mean, it's possible it's a one-piece body, but let's face it, they could easily hide that with a dark finish like this. But the wood grain looks very even on this example. We've got our black chrome Grover tuners. And the serial number of this one, kind of cool. Second day of 2024. Hey, it's the first 2024 guitar on the show. And all said and done, this one weighs 8 pounds, 3.8 ounces. Let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. Those were some interesting tones, coil split. So regular humbucking mode, it's pretty much your usual stuff. But then split. It sounds like they changed the voicing just a little bit. I'd say the coil splits sound better with a lighter picking attack. Now let's try that direct to bridge stuff. become a little bit more apparent on the distorted channel. And now we're out of phase. It almost gets like an active sound when you have both of the pickups split. It certainly has more of a modern tone to it. For some reason, using the direct-to-bridge makes the pickup microphonic. I'm not sure if that's a feature or a bad thing. I don't think I've ever had that before.
But I can talk into it. Seems like this bridge pickup is a little bit microphonic to start with.
It just gets slightly more microphonic when you pull that up. I'm curious how that compares to a 90s era studio. I mean, these should be the exact same pickups, they're just older. Now that we know all about the modern Les Paul Studio, what are my final thoughts here? Honestly, I'm a little bit conflicted. When these were first teased last year of having an ebony fretboard, I was extremely excited because it's them trying to, you know, make the 90s studios again. I was very impressed to see black binding on it as well, although I'm not really sure it adds anything, but at least it helps you see your white side marker inlays a little bit more clearly, I guess. But having that binding, having the Mother of Pearl logo, this really doesn't even feel like a studio anymore. It's really its own new creation. So in many ways, if we can get that whole fret sprouting stuff situated, I think these are actually really nice. Like, it's not, do I get the studio or do I step up to the modern or the standard? It's, hey, this is a really good guitar. Yeah, it might be called a studio, but it has its own merits. I bet it won't sell that well online, but in stores, it could probably win a lot of people over. That's where my mindset was before I played it. The tones. For me personally, maybe it's the PCB, maybe it's just the way they wind them, maybe it's just this particular set. I wasn't in love with it, but I'm also more of like a vintage tone guy. For me, I wasn't a huge fan of the coil splitting, except for on the clean channel. When it's really dialed back and you're just doing some finger picking stuff, it's great for that. But in an A/B test with one of the golden era studios with the ebony fretboard, I still preferred this tone-wise. However, this thing is a lot chunkier. It's got a little bit larger of a neck profile as well. So this is kind of one of those situations when Gibson introduced the 50s and 60s Les Paul standards. Before then, you would go for early 2000s Les Paul standard if you wanted a regular standard, but the introduction of the new models made you choose which one do you like better. So that's kind of what you have going on here. This is a fantastic standalone instrument. Don't let the whole studio name deceive you. So those are my conclusions on the new modern studio. Feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section. And if you're interested in owning this demo piece, you can find it for sale on my website, troglysguitarshow.com. All right, enjoy your new guitar knowledge, and we'll catch you tomorrow. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.